Welcome my husbando and waifu lovers that are watching this particular video. Today's video features a black and white horse surrounded by a yellow ring and the analysis therefore. Enjoy the video.
Let the lesson begin.
Hey guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is going to focus on the brand new Duel Cav 4 skill. Now, as I mentioned in my impressions video, which you can go watch before this, it is on a seasonal banner, it's not sparkable, and to be honest, just to like TLDR the whole video, it's not worth summoning for pretty much right now. It could be good later, and I'll tell you why it could be good later and not right now. So if you do end up landing upon it, or you do for whatever reason spend orbs for this, holding it might be your best option, and I'm going to explain through this video why it is. Consider that I am an F2P player, so I'm going to provide this from an F2P perspective. If you already have a +10 seasonal premium unit, then you probably don't need my video to validate that you should probably just give it to that unit. For example, Harmonious Mia or Summer Ursula or whatever super crazy premium +10 young La Rochelle's. If you already have that, you don't need this video to confirm that you should probably give it to them anyways. But for those of you who don't have infinite or near infinite resources to make those sort of decisions, there are actually only 26 options for Duel Cavalry right now, Duel Cavalry 4, and there are actually some really legitimate ways to make your arena experience a lot easier. But there are a lot of things to also consider why this Duel Cav skill isn't as impactful as you might think. This is not Duel Cavalry 4 where Reinhardt has come to take over the game again. This is a different, much subtler way, much more subtle way of thinking, like where this could be used. But I'm going to provide this video to enlighten your experience and, of course, hopefully make arena easier for you if you do land upon this. As you can see on the left, 26 candidates for Duel Cavalry 4, with about half of them being premium options and the other half being not so interesting, right? So yeah. Let's jump into some important things to consider before we even talk about like the build options and who you might consider giving this to and why they would be good options as well. One thing I want you to think about is scoring and why it's important that scoring is a big factor of Duel Cavalry 4. So what we have here, don't look at the builds, but just like let's assume this is a standard arena season with Alphonse as your bonus, and he's running like a Rally Plus and R-Duel Infantry 4, so like a pretty high scoring set with a healer. So a healer running Duel Cavalry 4, which in my opinion is the best usage of your Duel Cavalry 4. But we'll talk about why you wouldn't want to give it right away or use it at all. Now, healers are handicapped by the fact that they cannot run a Rally Plus, and they cannot run Ether or Ruptured Sky or any high scoring equivalent special. This effectively makes them score almost a merge or more, about a merge or more, less than another, let's just say anyone that's not a healer. So in this case, like Merlin is showed here, runs Ether and Rally Plus, and that gives you almost 1.5 like score team difference. This is significant when it comes to like fishing for specific scores in arena to find the right scores to essentially promote or stay in your tier. This doesn't really work to stay in tier 21 unless you have a super whale kind of scoring team in the first place, and those types of players might want to consider Duel Cavalry 4, and they can use a healer to make their arena experience easier. But generally speaking, like the Duel Cavalry 4 options, especially those that are F2P that aren't the healers, are not that impactful, not that interesting. Like Merlinus isn't like a great option, for example, or Rolf or Luis or whatnot. They're not really that interesting for your Cavalry Duel 4 options. Healers are, and I'll tell you why, but keep in mind that the scoring gap between something like Clarine and Merlinus is fairly impactful, And finally, the best candidate for like Sea Duel Cavalry in terms of scoring is Brave Lyn because of her preference B skill. Her preference B skill effectively makes her score at a 185 BST equivalent, which is like a dual hero essentially. So if you have a plus 10 Brave Lyn, then I would say that you probably want Sea Duel Cavalry 4 because that effectively can give you a very high scoring unit and really carry you into staying in tier 21 or tier 20.5 or 20, wherever you play. It'll make your score equivalency pretty easy to aim for. And of course, Lyn herself is actually a decent unit, despite the set that you would have to run would be a little bit weird. It would be a pretty decent unit to consider. So let's talk more into specific builds and why you may want to consider just holding Sea Duel Cavalry 4 if you land upon it or spend orbs for it. First, I want to bring up what I would consider a like really free win or easy win kind of setup, and that is Clarine or any healer. Like right now we don't have preference weapons on these healers, so in terms of 3-4 star healers, it doesn't matter who you pick, like Clarine, Priscilla, and Nana and Forest. Like you can just give it to anyone. But I want to bring to your attention the capabilities of like one of the easiest ways to get like arena wins, and I do this in Arena Assault. I covered it in my Arena Assault video, but essentially running a gravity dazzling staff combined with far trace effectively gives you cheating. Like it effectively lets you cheat because your enemy will not be able to reach you, and using the Canto effect of the far trace, as long as you're close enough to get some movement out of it, lets you hit and run for free against anything that isn't a null C unit, or you run into like the like harsh commands. If you run into a harsh command plus, those are like the soft counters, or I guess somewhat hard counters to this strategy. But this strategy is super effective against a lot of arena teams, because if you run into mostly like melee teams, melee enemy teams, you only effectively need a single movement of far trace or the Canto to go in, hit for free, and then move out. And you can do this with any healer, but right now the Cav healers don't have preference weapons, and this is one of the biggest defining factors on why you should probably hold Sea Duel Cavalry 4. Along the fact that it also scores poorly compared to other options. So you're not really giving yourself a score advantage by, let's say, using Clarine, Nana, Priscilla, or whatever with this strategy. It could be like a sort of thing you bring in and make your arena life easier. So you go in, you grab, you get out, and this works on like almost every unit that doesn't have null C or the enemy team isn't running harsh command plus. You're basically cheating through your arena experience, but this only scores equivalency to a 170 BST unit. You are taking a score hit compared to other Grail or investment options, and that's why it's not worth it. But on top of that, what we likely will see later down the road is Cav healer refines in general, and that makes using Sea Duel Cavalry 4 as like the best option right now kind of unknown. Yes, this strat with like gravity and far trace is, again, and Sea Duel Cavalry 4 is extremely premium, and that's why you shouldn't like commit orbs to it, because when you may not have far trace, probably might spend a lot of orbs for Sea Duel Cavalry 4. I don't know the scenario exactly for everyone. You got to make your own process through this, but essentially we don't know what sort of Cav healer refines are down the road. They could happen at any time. Distant counter refines took forever. Healer refines are likely to come, who knows, it might happen just like literally next month, or it could be a couple months from now. Either way, Sea Duel Cavalry 4 isn't an easy give to a single healer because we don't know what sort of things they'll end up getting. If you look at the left side here, we have Nana, who comes with Absorb Plus, and if you use the base weapon as a sort of like gauge for what could happen, then Absorb, maybe Nana becomes like the best Nosferatu Awakening tank or something right like that, right? Or maybe Priscilla has Panic Plus and she ends up with crazy panic effects in her weapon, and maybe supportive in nature. Maybe it does like healing at the beginning of the turn. Maybe it has odd recovery as a refine literally in the weapon. Maybe they change it to grab, for example. Like Ethlyn is a Grail unit and would be due for refine once they catch up to that. So she has fear. But if you look at Mist, who had slow, she ended up getting slow and fear at the beginning of a turn plus panic as a refine. So it's really crazy what they might do with all this. And finally, Forest is a little bit way out here. He does have a good stat spread right now because he's more recent, but again, panic staff and would be due for refine later down the road. These are just something to consider. Like, it's hard for me to like commit a dual cav skill like this, knowing that that all these units are likely due for refine soon, and they could do anything with these staffs. If it was to make it as simple as black and white, then you would likely want to give it to just your favorite cav healer, and you know, they all run this essential build here with gravity, far trace, and hit and run and such. If you're able to run a dancer, for example, and just like, you don't even need far trace, or if you have like reposition or something like that, change fate, you can literally do this strategy with any of them without even needing far trace. Far trace just makes it independent and really interesting. But let's talk about, you know, more premium options. Maybe you have something more mid-merge and whatnot. A very, very good thing to think about here is Elise. Elise has Grav in her weapon, but unfortunately she's locked into Wrathful on that weapon. So this would be a good example of like, you either have to depend on Elise taking a hit to get your hit and run mechanics in and then using Renewal to heal her back up, or you would run Wrathful plus the Dazzle Bee and then run someone with Change Fate or a Dance to get her out of danger post Grav hit. Another thing to think about is once preference weapons get their effects, such as Elise, you can run Odd Recovery in the C skill to give your team effective healing every other turn, plus removing debuffs. And that's, again, I feel right now like Elise is probably the best user of C Duel Cavalry. Of course, my opinion on this, but generally speaking, if you had an Elise at pretty high merge or at +10, this is a very easy way to win arena against a lot of matches. But, and finally, I mentioned this earlier, Brave Lyn is the highest scoring unit at 185, and the gap between a healer running Sea Duel Cavalry 4 and Lyn running it is pretty substantial. It's essentially 170 BST versus 185 on Lyn, and that's a huge gap in terms of scoring efficiency. Lyn is a solid option if you have her at +10 or near +10, but the healers make your arena run much easier at the cost of that score loss. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy the kind of gap we have in terms of how to think about C Duel Cav and whether you should be using it or not on certain units. If I were you and you do land upon this skill and you don't have like Lyn or Elise, you should just hold on to it and see what Cav healer refines come down the road. Or you can invest into your favorite, use the gravity setup, and then make, you know, very difficult weeks much easier at a score loss. Those are just some things to consider here, and I do think it's an interesting addition to the game, but it's not like an oh my god eye-popping you need this kind of scenario. In fact, Odd Recovery is probably more useful right now off of Sol than C Duel Cav 4 is, but that doesn't mean down the road that C Duel Cav 4 could effectively become very needed, very wanted, and potentially, hey, maybe healers get an upgrade to their preference. Like they get better specials or they get better assists that score more. You don't know. Maybe we get a legendary healer, although they would already score really high. Maybe a mythic healer as an example of that. They get like preference specials or assists and whatnot. Nonetheless, that concludes everything I'd want to talk about with C Duel Cav 4 in this video. I implore you guys to probably just skip the banner and don't worry about it right now. You know, when double special comes back and Sol comes back, that could be your time to decide whether things have changed from then and now. If you love this content, folks, then turn that thumbs up to blue. It helps out the channel, gets more reach. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. If you want to support the channel, consider the Patreon in the description below. There's a join button here on YouTube as well. All that helps to grow the content, helps it running, and you get to see more of this. Love you all. See you in the next one. Peace.
It's over.